Most people don't admit it out loud, but small talk can feel like a heavy weight. You're standing there nodding, searching for the right thing to say, and inside you're thinking, why does this feel so hard for me when it looks so easy for everyone else? And in that silence, you start to shrink back, second guess yourself, and maybe even avoid conversations altogether. The truth is, it's not that you don't care about people or don't know what to say. It's that somewhere along the way, you believe connection had to come from being impressive instead of being present. And that's what keeps so many of us stuck, feeling lonely even when we're surrounded by people. Small talk isn't really about the words, it's about the feeling underneath them. For so many of us, it's that quiet tension of walking into a room, wanting to connect but not knowing how. You start worrying about what to say, if it will sound awkward, if the other person will even care, and that pressure makes something simple feel complicated. The truth is, most people carry that same uncertainty, even if they hide it well. What matters isn't having the perfect line ready. It's learning how to show up calm, present, and open enough to let real connection happen. That's where conversations stop feeling like a performance and start feeling human again. Feeling awkward in everyday conversations isn't about not knowing what to say. It's about the weight of all the things you're carrying inside your head while you're trying to say it. You walk into a conversation already rehearsing, already doubting, already bracing for that moment when the silence shows up and you don't know what to do with it. That's where the awkwardness grows, not in the words themselves, but in the pressure you put on yourself to perform. And when that pressure builds, you stop hearing the person in front of you. You're not in the conversation anymore. You're stuck in your own head. Awkwardness is really just the gap between how you think you're supposed to show up and how you actually feel in the moment. That gap is where insecurity lies. You worry that you don't sound interesting enough or smart enough, or that you're not giving the response they were hoping for. And so instead of being present, you start managing impressions. You try to fill the space with words, or you pull back and stay quiet, and either way, you leave the conversation feeling like you missed something. That cycle makes you dread these interactions even more, and eventually, you start avoiding them altogether. At the root of this, it's not about conversations. It's about connection. Every one of us has this deep need to be seen and understood. But when you step into small talk with the belief that you have to earn that connection, that you have to prove your worth in a few sentences, you put yourself in a losing battle. You can't connect while you're trying to perform. The people you're talking to don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be real. And sometimes being real is as simple as saying, yeah, it's been a long day, or I'm glad we ran into each other. Simple words, delivered with presence, carry more weight than a rehearsed story ever could. Think about a time when someone made you feel at ease without saying much. Maybe it was a friend who just nodded while you vented, or a coworker who smiled and asked how you were doing and actually waited for your answer. What made those moments feel safe wasn't that they had the perfect script. It was that you could feel they weren't rushing to impress you. They were just there. That's the shift that makes awkwardness lose its power, learning to stop chasing the right words and instead learning to bring the right presence. Here's the hard part: presence feels vulnerable, because if you're not performing, then you're just you. And if someone doesn't respond well to that, it feels personal. That's the risk most people are trying to avoid when they cover up with chatter or keep everything surface level. But the truth is, the very thing you're protecting yourself from, rejection, judgment, dismissal, is the same thing keeping you from ever experiencing genuine connection. If you only ever give people a polished version of yourself, then even when they accept you, deep down it won't feel real. You'll wonder if they would still like you if you stopped performing. The way through that is not about memorizing conversation starters or tricks. It's about slowing down enough to remind yourself, I don't have to earn this space. I don't have to prove my value in the next 30 seconds. The people in front of me are just people with their own doubts and their own worries. They're not measuring me against some invisible standard. Most of the time, they're just grateful someone else is willing to show up and talk. When you realize that, the pressure drops. The silence doesn't feel like a failure anymore. It feels like part of the rhythm. Another thing that feeds awkwardness is comparison. You notice the coworker who seems to float through conversations with ease, or the friend who always has a funny story to tell, and you measure yourself against them. But what you don't see is the cost of their style or the truth underneath it. Sometimes that charisma is real, and sometimes it's just another mask. Either way, it's not your lane. Your value doesn't come from matching their style. Your value comes from being steady, genuine, and consistent. That might not grab attention the same way, but it builds trust. And in the long run, trust is what people remember. Let's be honest about something else. Awkwardness isn't always bad. It's a sign that you care. If you didn't care how the conversation went, you wouldn't feel the tension. That nervousness is proof that you want to connect, and that's a good thing. What matters is learning how to carry that nervousness without letting it control you. When you notice your shoulders tighten or your mind start racing, take a breath and remind yourself. Connection doesn't come from control. It comes from letting go of the need to control. The moment you stop trying to force the outcome, your words loosen up. You can actually listen. You can let the conversation flow instead of gripping it too tightly. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is moving from self-focus to other-focus. When you're caught in awkwardness, your thoughts are all about you. What do I sound like? Am I boring? Did I mess that up? But when you shift your focus to curiosity, what's this person really saying? How are they feeling? What matters to them right now? Everything changes. Suddenly, it's not about filling space, it's about noticing. And people can feel when you're really noticing them. That kind of attention doesn't just ease your awkwardness, it creates comfort for the other person too. The truth is, awkwardness will still show up sometimes. There will be pauses, fumbles, moments where you wish you'd said something differently. But those aren't failures. They're proof that you're human. Every relationship is built in those imperfect spaces. What people remember isn't how polished you sounded, it's how safe they felt with you. If you can carry that truth with you, the pressure to perform starts to lift. You stop walking into conversations bracing for disaster, and you start walking and willing to simply be there. And maybe that's the most important part, realizing that awkward isn't something to eliminate, it's something to accept. When you can accept that tension without running from it, you show people that you're comfortable enough to stay present, even when things aren't smooth. That's what makes you trustworthy. That's what builds connection. Because in a world where everyone is trying to look like they've got it all together, the person who can show up calmly, honestly, and without pretense is the one people are drawn to. So the next time you feel that awkwardness creeping in, don't see it as a sign of failure. See it as a cue to slow down, breathe, and shift your focus. You don't have to have the perfect response. You don't have to carry the whole conversation. You just have to be here, steady and genuine, long enough for the other person to feel safe enough to do the same. That's how awkward moments turn into real ones, and that's how everyday conversations become the place where real connection begins. Real connection doesn't come from the words themselves. It comes from the energy behind them, the presence you bring into a conversation. And yet, so many of us walk into interactions with the pressure to perform, like we have to carry the moment with clever stories, quick jokes, or the right response. That pressure makes conversations feel like a test instead of a human exchange. You find yourself rehearsing in your head, filling space just to avoid silence, or leaving the conversation replaying every line you said, wondering if you sounded awkward. The harder you try to force the words, the less connected you actually feel. What's happening underneath is this belief that connection is something you have to earn, that you need to prove your worth in the conversation, show that you're interesting, or keep the other person engaged so they won't drift away. But when you're operating from that place, you're not truly connecting. You're managing impressions, and people can feel it. Even if they don't name it, they sense the tension, the over-effort, the way your words are reaching for approval instead of reaching for them. And that gap is what leaves you walking away empty. Even after talking for an hour, connection is never about forcing words, it's about presence. It's about being willing to stand in the quiet, being willing to listen longer than you speak, being willing to let the conversation breathe. Sometimes the most meaningful thing you can offer isn't a story or a joke, but simple acknowledgement. I get that. That sounds tough. I'm glad you shared that. These aren't big or fancy words, but when they're said with genuine attention, they hold weight. They tell the other person, I see you. I'm here. That matters more than anything polished you could try to deliver. Think about someone you felt safe around. Maybe it was a grandparent, a mentor, or a friend who just seemed steady. Chances are, they weren't filling every silence. They weren't scrambling to impress you. They just had this calm way of being present, where you didn't feel like you had to perform either. That's what builds real connection. Not pressure, not perfection, but presence. People remember how they felt around you long after they forget what you said. The temptation to force words often comes from discomfort with silence. Silence feels heavy, awkward, like it's your job to patch it up before it gets too noticeable. But silence isn't the enemy. It's the space where trust grows. When you can stay calm in those quiet seconds, you're showing the other person that they don't have to rush either. That creates room for them to actually think, to feel, and to share more honestly. It's in those unforced moments that deeper things come out. The story they wouldn't have told if you had jumped in, the feeling they didn't know how to name until you gave them the space to. There's also a deeper layer here. Forcing words usually means you're carrying fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being enough. That fear pushes you to keep talking, to keep filling, to keep probing. But the paradox is, the more you chase connection out of fear, the further it slips away. Because true connection requires you to risk being seen just as you are, without the armor of constant words. That's where it feels vulnerable. And that vulnerability is exactly what makes it real. A lot of us confuse talking with connecting. We think if the conversation is flowing, if there are no pauses, if both people are engaged, then that must mean connection is happening. But connection is less about volume and more about depth. Two people can talk nonstop for hours and still feel miles apart. And two people can share just a few sentences and walk away with something meaningful. The difference isn't the quantity of words, it's the quality of presence. Here's the shift. Instead of asking yourself, what should I say next? Start asking, what is this moment asking of me? Maybe it's asking for a question, maybe for a nod, maybe just for silence. When you're tuned in, you don't have to force the right words because the right response will rise naturally. You'll notice the emotion in their voice, the hesitation before they finish their thought, the way their eyes light up when they mention something that matters. Those cues guide you into connection far better than any script could. Another way people force words is by making conversations transactional. You share something, they share something, back and forth like an even exchange. But real connection isn't measured by balance sheets of talking time. Sometimes the best gift you can give is just letting the other person take more space without rushing to match it. That doesn't make you small. It makes you safe. People don't need a perfect conversational partner. They need someone who can hold space for them without turning it into a performance. Of course, this takes practice. It's not easy to resist the urge to fill, to prove, to smooth over every silence. It takes slowing down and noticing your own patterns. Do you feel your chest tighten when the conversation pauses? Do you jump in with a story just to avoid discomfort? Do you replay your words later, criticizing yourself for not being more clever? Those are signs you're trying to force connection. The awareness itself is powerful. Because once you see it, you can choose a different way. When you stop forcing words, you start noticing more. You hear what people actually mean instead of just what they say. You catch the subtle shift in their tone, the way their body language changes, the small cues that show you where they really are. And when you respond to those, even with something simple, it lands deeply. It shows them you weren't just waiting for your turn to talk. You were with them. That's what builds trust. The truth is, most people are starving for that kind of presence. In a world full of noise, they rarely feel like someone is actually listening without an agenda. When you show up without trying to force or perform, you give them that rare gift, and in return, they open up to you. They relax. They feel safe. That's connection. It's not flashy. It's not always instant, but it's steady and it lasts. So maybe the goal isn't to never feel awkward or to always know the perfect words. Maybe the goal is to become the kind of person who can sit in a conversation without rushing, without forcing, without fear. Someone who understands that connection doesn't come from what you say it, but from who you are when you say it. When you bring that kind of grounded presence, the words take care of themselves, because at the end of the day, people don't remember the smoothness of your sentences or the cleverness of your replies. They remember how you made them feel. Did they feel rushed, managed, performed for, or did they feel seen, safe, and steady? That choice doesn't come from forcing words. It comes from choosing presence. And that's something you can bring into every conversation, no matter who it's with or how many words are spoken. Small talk feels harder than it should, not because the words are complicated, but because of the weight you're carrying into the moment. Most of us walk into small talk with this quiet pressure in the back of our mind. I need to sound interesting. I need to keep the conversation alive. I need to make sure they don't think I'm boring. That pressure makes what should be simple feel like a performance. Instead of just saying hello and seeing where the moment goes, you're measuring yourself, scanning for approval, and treating the other person like an audience. That's why it feels exhausting. You're not just having a conversation, you're trying to pass a test that no one else is grading you on. The truth is, small talk gets a bad reputation because we think of it as shallow. Talking about the weather, or how busy life is, or how traffic was on the way here, it feels surface level, like it doesn't really matter. But what most people miss is that small talk isn't about the topic, it's about the signal underneath. When someone asks how your day's going, they're not really trying to audit your schedule. They're saying, I see you. I'm opening the door. Will you step through? Small talk is the doorway to trust. It's not meant to carry the full weight of connection. It's meant to ease both of you into it. And when you start seeing it that way, the pressure softens. You realize you don't need to be profound, you just need to be present. Part of why small talk feels hard is because silence feels heavy. You ask a question, they answer briefly, and then there's that pause. In your head, it feels like a spotlight's on you to say something else. So you start scrambling, throwing out the next question, filling the space with words, or worse, retreating into quiet because you don't know where to go. That pressure is what makes the whole thing awkward. But here's the reality: silence only feels awkward if you treat it like a problem. In truth, silence is normal. It's a natural rhythm in conversation. When you can stay calm in it, you show the other person they don't have to rush either. And in that space, sometimes the best and most genuine things are said. There's also a deeper issue beneath small talk struggles: fear of rejection. Many people don't realize it, but every awkward pause or flat response can feel personal. You start to wonder, do they not like me? Am I boring them? Did I say something wrong? That insecurity builds, and soon you're no longer in the moment. You're performing damage control. But what you need to remember is this: most of the time, it's not about you. The other person might be tired, distracted, shy, or just not in the mood for much talking. That doesn't mean you failed. Your worth isn't measured by how lively every conversation feels. Sometimes your presence alone is enough, even if the exchange is short. Small talk also feels hard when we confuse it with connection. We expect these first few lines with someone: how's your week? Busy day. What do you think of this weather? To magically spark deep friendship. And when they don't, we feel disappointed. But that's like planting a seed and being upset it didn't turn into a tree in 5 minutes. Small talk isn't the whole relationship, it's just the soil where trust can grow. Real connection takes time, repeated interactions, and consistency. When you stop expecting every small talk moment to feel life-changing, you can relax and let it just be what it is, a starting point. The other reason small talk can feel overwhelming is that we put all the responsibility on ourselves to make it work. You may feel like you have to carry the conversation, keep it interesting, or steer it in the right direction. That's a lot of pressure to put on one person. Conversations are shared spaces. They're not supposed to rest entirely on your shoulders. When you remember that the other person has responsibility too, it evens the weight. You're not the entertainer, you're just a partner in the exchange. That mindset frees you to show up more naturally. So how do you make small talk simple? You shift your focus. Instead of trying to be interesting, try being interested. Curiosity is what turns a surface level exchange into a meaningful one. If someone mentions they had a long day, you don't need to launch into your own story or force a new topic. You can simply say, "What made it long?" Or, "Yeah, those days can be tough." That kind of response opens the door without pressure. It tells them you're listening, and it gives them the choice to share more if they want to. Curiosity takes the spotlight off you and puts it on the person you're with, and that's where connection grows. Another simple shift is to see small talk as practice instead of proof. Every conversation doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to walk away from each interaction feeling like you nailed it. Treat it as practice, a chance to be present, to listen, to show kindness in small ways. That mindset lowers the stakes. And the more you practice, the more natural it feels. Small talk isn't something you master once and for all. It's something you grow comfortable with by showing up again and again. It also helps to pay attention to your body in these moments. Notice how your shoulders tense up or how your breath gets shallow when you're nervous about the silence. Those are cues that you're slipping into performance mode. When you feel that happening, pause and take a slower breath. Relax your posture. Remind yourself this doesn't have to be impressive, it just has to be real. That small reset calms your nervous system and helps you step back into the conversation grounded. Think about the people you enjoy being around most. Chances are, it's not because they're the best storytellers or the smoothest talkers. It's because you feel comfortable around them. They don't rush, they don't force, they don't make the silence feel scary. They let the moment be what it is. That's what makes them magnetic. And you can do the same. You don't need a new personality. You just need to bring a calmer version of yourself into the room. At its core, small talk feels hard because we've turned it into something it was never meant to be. It's not about dazzling or performing. It's not about proving your worth in the first 30 seconds. It's simply about showing up, acknowledging the other person, and creating space where trust can slowly build. When you release the pressure for it to be more than that, it becomes simple again. So the next time you find yourself in small talk, notice the pressure rising and let it go. Don't force the words. Don't judge the silence. Just be curious, be present, and let the moment unfold. Because connection isn't built by saying the perfect thing. It's built by showing up calmly and honestly again and again. And when you can bring that presence, small talk stops being a struggle. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a simple doorway into something real. Most of the conversations we have in life don't happen in big, dramatic moments. They happen in the small ones. Walking into the kitchen in the morning, sitting in traffic with someone in the passenger seat, standing in line together at the store. These everyday moments often pass without much thought, filled with quick comments or silence, and then they're gone. But what most people don't realize is that these are the exact places where relationships are built. Connection doesn't wait for perfect timing or long sit-down talks. It grows in those ordinary exchanges if we know how to notice them and lean in. The challenge is, many of us don't see these little moments as opportunities. We tell ourselves real conversations have to be deep, serious, or planned out. So we treat the everyday ones as filler, like background noise that doesn't matter much. But here's the truth, small talk is the soil where meaningful talk grows. If we skip over it or dismiss it as unimportant, we miss the chance to show up consistently. And consistency is what tells people they can trust us enough to go deeper. When you can learn to bring presence into the small moments, you open the door to something bigger without forcing it. Think about how often you hear yourself say, "How was your day?" It's an easy, automatic question. But if you're half distracted when you ask it, or if you're already moving on before you hear the answer, it doesn't land. It feels like routine, not connection. But if you slow down just a little, ask the question, then actually look at them and wait for the response, that small shift changes everything. The same words, but delivered with attention, become an invitation. And when people feel that invitation, they're more likely to share what's real, not just what's polite. Everyday moments become meaningful when we approach them with curiosity instead of autopilot. Instead of rushing through the surface exchange, we linger. Someone says, "I was a long day," And instead of nodding and moving on, you might ask, what made it long? Or simply say, yeah, I've had those days too. These aren't grand gestures. They're simple ways of saying, I'm here, I care enough to stay with you in this moment. That's what makes the difference. It's not the depth of the question, it's the depth of attention. Another reason everyday conversations don't always feel meaningful is because we underestimate the power of small acknowledgments. We think we need the perfect response or the right advice to make a moment matter. But most of the time, what people want isn't advice, it's recognition. A simple, I hear you, or that sounds tough, can mean more than a long lecture. When you reflect back what someone's feeling, you're telling them they don't have to carry it alone. And that, in itself, is meaningful. Sometimes, turning a moment into connection doesn't even require words. Think about sitting in the car with someone you trust. You don't have to fill every silence, because the comfort of just being there is enough. That's meaningful too. We forget that presence is a form of communication. The way you set your phone down when someone is talking, the way you pause to actually listen instead of rushing in with your own story, the way you give someone your full attention even in a small moment, those nonverbal choices often say more than words ever could. But here's where it gets harder to create meaningful moments. You have to be willing to slow down. And slowing down means confronting your own distractions, your own business, your own discomfort with stillness. Many of us avoid leaning into these everyday moments because they feel too ordinary, or because we're afraid of where they might lead. Maybe if I ask another question, they'll open up about something heavy and I won't know what to do with it. Maybe if I really listen, I'll have to set aside my own agenda for a while. These fears keep us on the surface, but real connection requires the courage to let go of control and be present even when you don't know exactly what's coming. It's also worth noticing how our tone shapes the moment. You can ask the same question in two different ways and get two very different results. How's it going? Said flatly while scrolling your phone won't open any doors. But how's it going? Said with eye contact, steady voice, and patience for the answer can turn into something real. People respond to the energy you bring. If your tone says you're rushed or checked out, they'll match it. If your tone says you're safe and genuinely interested, they'll lean in. The words are simple, but the delivery is everything. We also need to talk about timing. Not every everyday moment is the right one to go deep, and that's okay. Sometimes people aren't ready, sometimes they're tired, sometimes they just want to keep things light. Part of emotional intelligence is learning to read that. But even in those lighter moments, you can still create meaning by showing warmth, humor, and kindness. A shared laugh in the grocery line, a gentle word before bed, a small thank you when someone passes you the salt. These things seem small, but over time, they add up. They tell the other person you matter to me, even in the ordinary. And that consistency is what builds trust for the bigger conversations when they come. When you practice this, you'll notice something shift. Those everyday moments that used to feel forgettable start to carry weight. You begin to see that connection isn't built in grand gestures or perfectly timed talks. It's built in the steady practice of showing up moment by moment. And when you show up this way, the other person feels it. They may not always say it out loud, but they notice. They feel safer, more valued, more open. And slowly, the relationship deepens without you ever having to force it. The truth is, every relationship is really just a collection of moments. And if you treat the everyday ones as disposable, you end up with gaps, distance that grows without you even noticing. But if you treat those moments as opportunities, you create a steady thread of connection that weaves through the ordinary and holds everything together. That's what keeps relationships strong when life gets busy, when conflict shows up, or when harder seasons come. Because you've already built a foundation of small but meaningful moments that remind both of you we're in this together. So maybe the real shift is this: stop waiting for the perfect time to have a meaningful conversation and start creating meaning in the time you already have. Don't underestimate the power of a kind word at the right moment or the weight of undivided attention when someone least expects it. Those everyday choices are where connection lives. And when you show up consistently in those small ways, you'll find that the big conversations flow more naturally because trust has already been built one ordinary moment at a time. In the end, turning everyday moments into meaningful conversations isn't about adding more words or creating more depth on command. It's about being intentional with what's already in front of you. It's about slowing down, staying curious, and remembering that presence matters more than performance. When you live that way, even the most ordinary exchanges, a passing comment, a shared laugh, a quick check-in, become the building blocks of something lasting. And that's how relationships grow, not in leaps, but in steps, one simple moment at a time. One of the most common fears people carry into conversations is the fear of not knowing what to say. You're standing there, someone's looking at you, and your mind goes blank. Inside, you feel the pressure rising, the silence stretching, the expectation growing, and the thought creeping in that maybe you're failing in that moment. It feels small from the outside, but inside it can feel overwhelming. That fear doesn't just live in the silence itself. It lives in the story you tell yourself about what that silence means. You think it means you're awkward or boring or that you don't belong. And once you start believing that story, it's easy to shrink back, avoid conversations altogether, and lose confidence before you even begin. The truth is, not knowing what to say is not a failure. It's part of being human. Every person you've ever seen who seems naturally confident in conversation has faced the same blank moments. The difference is how they carry themselves in it. Confidence isn't about always having the right words ready. It's about being steady enough when the words don't come. Because when you can hold yourself calmly in those spaces, the pressure loses its grip. People aren't drawn to perfection in conversation. They're drawn to presence, steadiness, and honesty. What makes those blank moments feel so heavy is the belief that you have to fill every silence. You don't. Silence doesn't mean you've failed, and it doesn't mean the other person is judging you. Most of the time, they don't even notice the pause the way you do. They're in their own head, carrying their own nerves. What they will notice is whether you panic or whether you stay grounded. If you can breathe, smile, and let the moment pass naturally, the silence turns from something threatening into something normal. And in that shift, you start to see that confidence isn't about control, it's about acceptance. Think about someone you trust, someone you've always felt comfortable with. Chances are you didn't feel that way because they always had the perfect thing to say. You felt safe with them because they weren't rushing, they weren't performing, they weren't trying to impress you every second. They gave you space to be yourself, even in the quiet moments. That's the kind of confidence that matters. It's not loud, it's not showy, it's not about filling the room. It's about being okay with yourself, even when you don't have the words. One of the hidden traps in these situations is comparison. You notice how easily other people seem to keep conversations flowing. The coworker with endless stories, the friend who always knows the right joke, the stranger who seems at ease with everyone. And then you measure yourself against them, convinced that you don't measure up. But what you don't see is the cost of their style. You don't see the moments when they feel insecure or the ways they hide their own silence. Confidence isn't about matching someone else's way of speaking. It's about finding steadiness in your own. When you stop chasing someone else's rhythm and start accepting your own, that's when the weight of comparison starts to lift. Confidence in these moments also comes from curiosity. When you don't know what to say, shift the focus away from yourself. Ask the other person something small and genuine. It doesn't have to be profound. How's your day going? What's been keeping you busy? How do you know the people here? These simple questions take the spotlight off you and invite the other person to share. And when you really listen to their answer, not planning your next line, not worrying if you'll sound smart enough, the conversation begins to flow. People can feel when you're genuinely interested in them. And often your attention matters more than anything clever you could have said. There will still be times when your mind goes blank, even when you're trying. That's normal. In those moments, the most powerful thing you can do is name it with honesty. You can laugh lightly and say, "I just lost my train of thought," or "I'm not sure what to say here." That kind of honesty doesn't make you look weak. It makes you relatable. It shows the other person you're comfortable enough to be real, and it often relaxes them too. Because if you can admit you don't have it all together, it gives them permission to drop the performance as well. That's how small moments of honesty create real connection. It's also important to notice the way you talk to yourself in these situations. Most of the discomfort doesn't come from the silence itself. It comes from your self-criticism. You replay the moment in your head, picking apart every pause, every stumble, every wrong word. But confidence grows when you practice self-compassion instead. When you can tell yourself, I handled that the best I could. I showed up. I was present. You stop treating conversation like a test you have to pass. And over time, that shift changes the way you carry yourself in every interaction. Think about it this way: the people you're talking to aren't looking for perfect sentences. They're looking for someone who feels safe, someone who makes them feel seen, someone who doesn't add more pressure to the room. If you can bring that energy, calm, curious, and steady, the words don't have to be perfect. The moment doesn't have to be flawless. What matters is how the other person feels when they're with you. And that feeling isn't built by polished conversation, it's built by presence. Another piece of this is learning to separate your worth from the outcome of a conversation. Too often, we tie our confidence to how well we think we performed, if it flowed smoothly, if the other person laughed, if we got positive feedback. But conversations are not report cards. They're human exchanges, unpredictable and imperfect. Sometimes they'll land beautifully, sometimes they'll feel flat, and that's okay. Your value doesn't rise and fall with every interaction. Confidence comes from carrying that truth with you, that you are steady and whole, regardless of how the words come out. There's also freedom in remembering that connection doesn't always require constant talking. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations are the ones where fewer words are spoken. Sitting in quiet with someone, watching a game, sharing a meal, or even just walking side by side, those moments carry weight too. When you stop demanding that every silence be filled, you open the door for deeper, calmer connection to grow. That's when you realize that not knowing what to say isn't a barrier, it's just part of the rhythm of being human together. So when you find yourself in that familiar tension, standing there, unsure of what to say next, take a breath. Remind yourself that this is not a test. Your job isn't to impress, it's to be present. You don't have to force the right words. You don't have to cover every silence. Confidence is not about always knowing what to say. It's about staying calm when you don't. And when you can hold yourself steady in those moments, you'll find that the pressure begins to fade and the connection you've been chasing becomes something you can actually feel. Because in the end, people won't remember if your words came out smooth or stumbled. They'll remember if they felt safe with you, if they felt seen, if they felt like they didn't have to perform in your presence. And that's the kind of confidence anyone can bring, not the kind built on perfect sentences, but the kind built on steady presence. That's the confidence that turns even the blank moments into real ones. And that's the confidence that makes every conversation, no matter how small, an opportunity for connection.